Acculturation are changes that one encounters as we adapt to a new culture. We learn the new language, we learn new customs. And then there's enculturation, the process of native culture learning and retaining of native culture. Learning my native language and my native customs. And growing up in Australia, I don't know, I just learned that it operated on a binary. Being more Australian makes me less Vietnamese, or being more Vietnamese makes me less Australian. And so it was rather groundbreaking for me to learn that this actually exists on a continuum, a matrix. And as mental health clinicians, as well as people with lived experiences, I invite you to be curious about the forces that have contributed towards adoption and rejection of host culture and of native culture. We were one of the first waves of refugees into Australia. You see, those who left during the fall of Saigon were all taken in by the United States. And so by the time the waves of Vietnamese boat people came, there were resources available for enculturation as well as acculturation, depending upon what part of the United States that person had landed. And yet for ourselves in the Australian landscape, we were the first. And so by the time there were Vietnamese language schools available, I am 8 years old, my little sister is 6 years old, and English is the language that we speak to each other. And so I distinctly remember for 2 years of Saturday afternoons, on a Sunday afternoons, my little sister and I were best friends because we couldn't make friends with the other Vietnamese kids. Because they were either more recently resettled or they had resettled into a hub of community. And so for me, enculturation is something that I've returned to in my 30s and 40s. I remember as a child that my parents being educated up until 3rd grade for my father and 9th grade for my sister, for my mother, it meant that they got factory jobs because that was what was available. And yet, I'm so grateful because Australia has a unionised workforce that offers a dignity in terms of working conditions for less skilled workers. I knew my parents loved us because they were never there. I remember handwriting my own sick notes in elementary school in the handwriting of a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, and my mother would simply sign her signature at the bottom of the note. And that was accepted and acceptable for the teachers at the time. And yet I became a bridge for my parents because my brain and my sister's brain was so young and neuroplastic. We quickly adopted the language and culture and customs. And so my language levels in Vietnamese diminished very rapidly, improved significantly in English, and yet my parents' English skills got better, but not enough for us to have a relationship with each other. And running parallel to this, I'm going to school in Australia, and the imperative to make friends with the other kids meant that I learned all about Australian rules football. I learned the names of all the teams. I learned where they were on the Australian Rules Football League ladder. I learned the names of the popular players, and I learned what happened blow by blow in every game, in every quarter of every game, so that I'd have something to talk about at school on Monday morning. So by the time I became a teenager, taking care of my parents' mental health issues and being a bridge between them and the host culture was just too much for me. I struggled with drugs and alcohol and boys and school rejection. Appeared before the Juvenile Justice Court and was expelled from high school. And so what I see there for myself is a confluence of factors that accumulated over time as a result of a lack of resourcing. And the reason I share this is because I don't believe there's much difference between my story and the stories of our spaces. And I can these days grieve that which I gave away in order to belong. I can also grieve that which I never got to experience or metabolize into myself as aspects of cultural identity. And I can also engage in the acts of reclamation in the ways that feel powerful and appropriate for me as they arise over time.